Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's debate between the incumbent Governor Mark White and the challenger Bill Clements.
We're celebrating Texas this year.
The challenger in the governor's race is a Dallas native, Bill Clements, a graduate of Highland Park High and Southern Methodist University. He began working in the oil patch as a roughneck and a driller and rose to the position as chairman of the board of SEDCO, a major Texas petroleum company. Clements served as Deputy Secretary of Defense in the Ford cabinet in the 70s and came home to Texas to make a successful run for governor. He served in that capacity and is former chairman of the Southern Governors Association. He's married to the former Rita Crocker, and they have 2 children. The incumbent in the race is Mark White, a native of Henderson, a product of the Houston school system and Baylor University. He practiced law and in 1966 became an assistant attorney general. In 1973, White was appointed Secretary of State and 6 years later was elected Attorney General. In November of 1982, Mark White was elected governor. He's a member of the Southern States Energy Board, the Interstate Oil Compact Commission, and the Border Governors Association. Governor White and his wife Linda Gale have 3 children. Tonight's debate is being carried on 23 television stations and 40 radio stations around the state, as well as the Texas Associated Press Radio Network. This debate is sponsored by the League of Women Voters Texas Education Fund. Our panelists for tonight are Mike Snyder of KXAS-TV in Dallas-Fort Worth, Bill Baessa of KPRC-TV in Houston, and Anne Marie Kilday, the Austin Bureau of the Houston Chronicle. Now, the guidelines for this are fairly simple. Each panelist can ask a question and then a follow-up question. Then the other candidate has 1 minute to spend in rebuttal if he chooses. The candidates have the right to make a 2.5-minute opening statement and a 3-minute closing statement. Now, prior to this evening, representatives of the candidates met. We had a coin toss, and it was determined that Governor White would give the second opening statement and the first closing statement. So far, our opening statement this evening, former Governor Bill Clements for 2.5 minutes. Governor?
League of Women Voters, Channel 2, my fellow Texans, it's a great pleasure to me to have this debate with Mark White and discuss the issues that are before us in Texas. There is a fundamental difference between myself and Mark White. I remember well our same debate 4 years ago, and at that time political rhetoric prevailed. And all Mark White talked about turned out to be a series of broken promises. He promised to not raise taxes, and he did, the largest tax increase in Texas history. He promised not to raise tuition. It's up 400%. He promised that he would lower utility bills, and they're up 13.3% per average family per year. He promised not to raise the gasoline tax. It's up 200%. And this just goes on and on and on. This year tonight, let's stay with the facts. Let's let the record prevail. Let's debate the Texas economy. Let's debate jobs and job formation, venture capital, risk capital, recruiting industry, formation of small business, taxes, right to work. Let's debate our vision of Texas and the future of Texas for our young people. Let's debate crime and drugs and early release, prison construction, restructuring the Texas criminal justice system. Let's debate education. House Bill 72, the elected state education board, budget cuts in higher education, the relationship of industry to higher education and the formation of jobs and research facilities. Let's debate state government. Our revenues are up $11.2 billion since I left office, almost $3 billion per year, and yet we have a budget shortfall. These are the issues the people of Texas want discussed without rhetoric, innuendo, nuance, or half-truths. These are indeed, and there are indeed, real differences between Bill Clements and Mark White. Let this election be a referendum, literally, on the 4 years of Mark White and the 4 years of Bill Clements. Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be with you tonight.
Thank you, sir. Now for his 2.5-minute opening statement, Governor Mark White.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you here again tonight. When I ran for governor in 1982, the price of oil was over $30 a barrel. And the main forecast was it would be going up, not down. Because of international trade policies and because of an administration in Washington that would not fight for our industry here at home, we've seen that price of oil fall and fall dramatically. No one knew it would fall as far or as fast, but it did, and it was hurting our economy. So we had a tough choice. We could either let our schools continue to slip, we could let our roads continue to decay, we could let our elderly get sicker and poorer, and let our water problems grow. Or we could raise revenues and meet our responsibilities. Now, Bill Clements has just gotten through criticizing me for doing just that. He would have let our schools and our hospitals and our elderly suffer. And I think that as a result of his position, we would be in worse shape today. We did have to cut. We cut $1.2 billion out of that budget, and that's where I drew the line. I said our children and our elderly come first. And I said we have to have some more revenue rather than to turn back on our investments in the future. Bill, if you don't raise taxes, you're going to have to cut out meals for 117,000 senior citizens in Texas. You've got to throw out of our nursing homes 30,000 elderly and disabled Texans. And you're going to have to deny 60,000 people eyeglasses and 5,000 people hearing aids. You're going to have to cut highway building by $900 million and throw 22,000 more people out of work. And you're going to have to end full-day kindergarten and four-year-old programs for our schools, and cut teacher pay and fire drug counselors. Fellow Texans working together, we've made great progress. We made education our top priority, and that's our plan. We enacted a water plan for all of Texas, urban and rural, the first in our history. We're building new roads and highways all across Texas, and we're now at long last diversifying our economy. The people of Texas have a crucial choice to make on Election Day, but it's a choice about the future of Texas. For too long, Bill, you've been keeping your plan about the future a secret. Let's debate that plan now.
The first question for Governor Clements from Mr. Snyder.
Good evening, Governor. Despite what has just been done by the special session of the legislature, State Controller Bob Bullock says when the new legislative session opens in January, this state will be facing a new $5 billion deficit for the budget years 88 and 89. Some of the states say that programs are going to have to die and that agencies are going to have to close. You yourself say that you've got to cut the cloth to fit the pattern. Which state agencies and which state programs are you going to give the bad news to this evening?
Well, it's interesting that this would be the first question. I think that most people don't realize that with all this conversation about budget cuts and so forth, that our Texas tax revenues in the 3 years since I've left office, from January 1983 to 86, those Texas tax revenues are up 38%, or $11.2 billion. Almost, not quite, $3 billion per year. Texas tax revenues are up. We have ample revenue. Revenues are not the problem. Spending is totally out of control. We have a governor who has had a policy of tax and spend and spend. Let me read you what's happened in state government since I left just 3 years ago in January. The Treasury Department is up 258%. The Attorney General's office is up 134%. The General Land Office is up 120%. The Governor's office is up 50%, 58%. The Railroad Commission, 64%. All told, these agencies, the total increase in the Big 12 agencies, they're up an average of 51%. The statewide elected officials are up 80%. And we've had 2 special sessions of this legislature with an $18.6 billion yearly budget, and all they have actually cut is $43 million, or 0.25% out of an $18 billion budget. This is absurd. It's a classic example of no leadership. We had a governor who did not take the grasp, did not execute budget execution authority, did not cure the cash flow problem, and we still have an $800 million hickey waiting for the governor in January to still solve. He didn't solve any problem. Talk about a Band-Aid. He didn't even put Mercurocone on the problem.
Your follow-up?
Yes, Governor. The question was specifically, what spending would you cut? Spending is the issue here, and you went through all of the problems that you state, but you did not say where you would cut. Would you
Well,
please tell us this evening where you intend to cut?
Well, I would start out and I'd sell that Japanese jet that he bought for $3.5 million with a deluxe $4,500 John in it and a $5,100 mixed drink gallery and a $4,200 swivel chair. I sure wouldn't allow the governor's office to take out $40,000 from the film industry to build a child's playroom. I wouldn't let the Department of Agriculture, that agricultural commissioner, take $560,000 to buy a new airplane. I wouldn't pay $10,000 to a consultant just to design a letterhead for me. I wouldn't allow the Attorney General's office to go up for 258% in his budget. Look, all these things are possible. There's a full menu that tells you that spending is totally out of control. What we need to do is to go back to the basics of zero-based budgeting, prioritize every one of those agencies and commissions, put them in an order of priority, start from the bottom, and do one of three things. You either merge it with an overlapping, duplicating agency, you curtail the program, or you eliminate the program entirely. You establish a system of internal audit, you establish a system of management by objective, and you do exactly what any ordinary normal business person will do. We unfortunately have had a governor in Austin who has no business experience whatsoever, does not understand fiscal responsibilities, and does not understand budgetary controls.
Rebuttal, Governor White?
Well, first of all, he hadn't told you one single cut, but he said he was going to have some cuts to be made up there for that $5 billion that you're talking about. The fact of the matter is this governor, Bill Clements, the former governor, doesn't have a plan to meet the budget needs of this state. He's failed totally. When we were there debating the issues before that legislature, he went off to New Mexico. He hid out. He dropped out. He said it wasn't his job. Quite frankly, I think that the candidates for an office ought to be there to debate the issues, and he wasn't there to debate those issues. The cuts are going to have to be enormous under Bill Clements, and it means we'll lose a highway system in Texas. He knows that, and he's just using this anti-tax comment to gloss over the fact that it will destroy jobs for 22,000 people in Texas. He has to deliver the cuts. He's the one that has the responsibility of showing the numbers, and he's failed to do it.
Mr. Bassett?
Governor White, will further cuts and higher taxes be necessary in the next biennium? And if so, how deep will those cuts be? How high will those taxes be?
Well, first of all, we're going to go through the process, I think, as any person in their home budget would. They would first of all see where we can cut again, see if there are other ways we can save money in government. That's what the budgetary process is all about. We've had zero-based budgeting in Texas for, 1973. It wasn't Bill Clements' idea, it was Dolph Briscoe's and Bill Hobby's idea. We've had one of the tightest budgeted state governments in many years right here in Texas. I'm the first governor in many years in Texas that has a lower second year of the biennium budget than he had the first year. We have cut our budget. What we're going to do for the future is go back and review it again, see what we can cut again. We will then reform our tax structure because we've had a change in the oil and gas economy. We can no longer rely upon it as we have in the past. And I think by broadening the base of our sales tax, trying to make certain we don't do anything to tax groceries or food, hospitals or doctors, then we'll be able to see that broadened base will be fairer, and it possibly can even lower the rates for our sales tax. I think that's the approach we have to take. Cut first, and then see if we can't have a fair, broader base sales tax to take up the difference.
I think that you've indicated that there will be deeper cuts and that there will be new taxes. Can you be specific this evening about which agencies will be cut and where these which entities will be taxed to raise new revenue?
Well, because of the tough times we're in, we're having to make better decisions today. We're making better decisions about prisons. One of the big differences, I think, is that we're having to make hard choices. Bill Clements, frankly, hasn't been out there on the playing field, and he's abandoned that field, and he's never told us exactly what he would do, but he's criticized everything that we've done. I think that's a mistake. I think his obligation is to come forward and give those examples of where money can be saved. He abandoned that role, and I think that was damage to him, quite frankly. What we're going to be doing is to go back into that budget. Every time you continue to look for savings, And I don't know exactly where they'll be, but we've been asking for those plans to come forward, and we're getting savings from the various agencies, and they're dramatic savings. We're changing the way we go about financing our prisons. We're changing the way in which we're building our highways and lowering the cost. That's what we're going to do.
You have a minute for rebuttal, sir.
Well, first of all, I would not call a cut of $43 million out of an $18 billion budget dramatic savings. I think that's nonsense. That's absurd. You know, it's interesting to me that he never answered your question. He never told you where he was going to cut or what tax he's going to raise, but you can be sure he's going to raise taxes. Think for a moment. He promised he would not raise taxes before, and he gave Texas the largest tax increase in our state's history. He promised he would lower utility bills, and of course he didn't. He promised he wouldn't raise tuition, and it's up 400%. He will put an income tax on the people of Texas just as sure as we're here tonight debating. He says he won't, but can you believe him? Everybody's utility bill is up. It's not down. I don't believe him, and I don't think the people of Texas will believe him.
Ms. Kilday, your question for Governor Clements.
Governor Clements, when you started your campaign this year, you said that you would veto any and all tax or fee increases during a second term. In light of the state's current financial situation, can you keep that promise in this campaign?
Well, what I have said was, and I have said it many times, is that during this biennium that we're in, and considering the $2.3 billion shortfall that the two special sessions of the legislature were to have addressed and didn't accomplish what they wanted to, that I did not think that a tax increase was necessary, and I still don't. You know, they still have an $800 million shortfall sitting out there waiting for the next governor in January. So that's the remainder out of the $2.3 billion shortfall. And they only made $43 million of real cuts in two special sessions. So yes, we're going to scrub that budget. We're going to prioritize every one of those programs and every agent, which this governor never did. I wrote him twice. I wrote him in June, I wrote him in July, and told him the thing to do was to prioritize every program in the various agencies and departments of state government. He has not done that. I wrote him and told him twice, June and July. The first item on his agenda should be Budget Execution Authority, because that would enable him to retain within the department certain monies and not spend it, and that would help the budget shortfall. And secondly, it would practically cure the cash flow problem. I want to remind everybody that this was a constitutional amendment passed by the people of Texas last November by 57%. The people of Texas spoke, and yet Mark White did not respond to what the people of Texas asked him to do. The legislature met in two special sessions, and they still haven't passed Budget Execution Authority. So yes, I have a plan, I had a plan, I've got a plan, and I will execute that plan. He didn't understand how to do that. He has no business experience, and he doesn't understand budgetary controls.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do, Governor. Can you still keep your promise not to raise taxes if you get a second term as governor?
I've said that under no circumstances will I raise taxes in the budget crunch that is related to this particular biennium that we're in to cure the $2.3 billion shortfall. I am optimistic about not raising taxes in the following biennium that would go into 88 and 89. But as far as this biennium is concerned and the $2.3 billion shortfall about which there's been so much conversation, there is absolutely no need to raise taxes.
You have rebuttal time, sir.
Bill Clements, I don't know where you were when we needed you, but we were all down there in that debate, in that legislative session. And not only did I call one legislative session asking for you to give that special secret plan that you had to us so we could use it, I even gave you a second chance, Bill. I called two sessions, and you still didn't have a plan then. For you to come out at this late date and, first of all, misstate the facts, misstate the amount of the cuts. Those cuts were clear-cut, $1.2 billion. You can't argue with that, Bill. Everybody knows it but you. The fact of the matter is, this budget-cutting process went down to a point where we were going to have to take glasses off the eyes of people who couldn't see very well. We're going to have to put people out in the street, out of nursing homes. And if you don't think there's anything wrong with that bill, just go ahead and tell the people that. I think it's important.
Mr. Snyder.
Governor White, on August 6th, when you called the special session of the legislature to Austin, you outlined a plan for state spending to be cut $1.4 billion. Lawmakers cut barely a third of that. And in addition to your requested sales tax hike, they also passed a hike in the state gasoline tax. Why were you not able to throttle the spending habits of the state legislature, and why should the voters think that you can do it in January?
Well, the Republican leadership in that legislature couldn't find any more cuts themselves. They kept talking about trying to cut the budget, but the Republican leadership in that House could not find the cuts. They couldn't make them any deeper than they did. Bill Clements has a secret plan that he says he knows how to cut that budget, but he never did when he was governor. Spending went up when he was governor 56%. He cut when he was governor. Yes, he did. He cut two things, two mighty programs. One of those programs was a prison that we badly needed. He vetoed a prison. Cost us 5,000 cells. He also cut the bill that he vetoed for our teacher retirement system so that they could have hospitalization insurance. Those are the kind of cuts he's talking about, and I think that's wrong. What we're going to do is to keep working with that legislature to see where we can find savings. Obviously, we're not going to raise taxes first. That was not the way we operated there. We cut as far as they could, and then we made up the difference to make certain that we were not going to be putting people out of nursing homes, on the street, cutting back in education. Bill Clements would do that. I feel very confident he would. He made those cuts when he was governor, and I think he'd do it again. He says we don't need new revenues. The fact of the matter is tax revenues are down today. He said they were up. You've seen the price of oil, it went down. Do you think severance taxes increased when the price of oil went down? Certainly not, and Bill Clements ought to know that. He shouldn't mislead the people of this state along those lines. That's wrong. And Bill, you know it too, and I think it's a mistake for you to misstate that.
Governor, again, the question is back to my original question, and it centers on leadership. You had identified in your speech on August 6th $1.4 billion in state spending that could be cut. You identified those programs yourself. And even before the legislative session began, you asked state agencies to voluntarily cut their budgets by 13%. First of all, you weren't able to lead the legislature to cut $1.4 billion. But second of all, have those state agencies you directed to cut the 13% done so? And has the hiring freeze that you asked for been implemented?
Yes, the hiring freeze has been implemented, and the cuts amount to $1.2 billion. That's just slightly under what I asked for. And I think our leadership was clear. While Bill Clements was in New Mexico, we were down there working with the problems of Houston, Texas, and Dallas, and all the other communities that have projects that are involved that would be cut under his plan. Bill Clements' plan would cut the highways that go up through North Central Expressway. It would destroy the road system in this state. We can't afford that type of philosophy in government, and I think the people of Texas know that.
Sir, rebuttal time.
There's a whole menu of misstatements here that I would like to correct. The truth is that revenues in the state of Texas are up $11.2 billion since I left office in January 1983. That is a fact. That is certified by the controller, Mr. Bullock. So let's lay that aside. Revenues are up substantially, almost $3 billion per year. The Legislative Budget Board, which is the most senior body in Texas on budgets, has issued a statement which is available to the public that shows that considering inflation and considering population growth, both of which were extreme in my administration, I actually reduced state government by 5%, and Mark White, in his administration, has a growth in state government of 15%, or a difference in state government management of 20%. Also, oil is not the issue. Excuse me, my time is up.
Mr. Biasa.
Governor, let's talk about jobs for a second. Your campaign says that your strong suit is creating new jobs to bring new prosperity to Texas. And your campaign further points out that under your leadership, 960,000 new jobs were created in Texas. But that was when times were a lot better. And many of those jobs were tied either directly or indirectly to the oil industry. Times aren't like that anymore. Where will those jobs come from?
Well, let's lay aside some of the misstatements that have been made tonight with regard to the oil situation. You know, during my administration, and these are audited numbers certified by Mr. Bullock, the controller, during my 4 years in office, the price of oil was $25.31 per barrel, average per month over a 4-year period. During Mark White's administration, the price of oil over his 3.5 years, because this just goes through June the 30th, but still it covers most of the period because oil has gone up really since June the 30th. His price average per month is $25.50. His price average per oil is actually 19 cents higher than mine. Those are audited numbers out of the controller's office. The price of oil is really not the issue at all. Let's talk about the slice of the pie in the budget. Oil tax revenues represent only 8 cents out of every tax dollar. That's all. Sales tax revenues represent 39.6 cents out of every tax dollar. So yes, I do have a plan for the economy and for the formation of jobs. We need to control taxes. We need to enhance higher education. We need to expand the commercial ties with Mexico. We need to expand and create business climate for small business, because 2/3 of all jobs are in small business. We need to have a real effort towards high-tech research and development centers and combine the state and the federal and the local private enterprises in research. And we need to have full cooperation and communication with Washington and the federal agencies. This is terribly important. We now have an administration of Mark White has no communication with the federal government. He calls the White House, there ain't nobody home, believe me. There is no cooperation, there is no communication.
You listed a 6-point plan.
I did.
I believe, that would create new jobs.
Yes, sir.
How long would that take for Texans to become employed again under this plan?
I think that the acceleration and the impetus of that plan would be felt within 6 months. I would immediately call into conference the heads of the larger industrial complex that's in Texas that is under contract to the Department of Defense. And the first thing I would do is to bring about an acceleration of already those existing procurement contracts with the Department of Defense. I would immediately communicate with President Reagan and Secretary Weinberger in the Department of Defense. And as an example, General Dynamics F-16s in Fort Worth, they already have the contract in place. It's an ongoing contract, and there's no reason it can't be accelerated. Look what my conversation with President Reagan did so far as NASA is concerned. I brought that to a head, and the statements that Mr. Fletcher had been making, he turned 180 degrees around, and those contract relationships and the responsibilities stayed right there in NASA where they belong. And that was a result of talking with President Reagan and Don Regan, the Chief of Staff. There's no question about it. I did it on July the 23rd for some 45 minutes when President Reagan was in Dallas. These are the things that can be done with a governor who has that line of communication into the federal government. Think how this could help in the Secretary of Agriculture. Think how it could help with the Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary of Energy. You know, here's a governor who wasn't even invited to an energy conference. Oklahoma was, Wyoming was, but he wasn't.
Rebuttal, sir?
First of all, Bill, while you're talking to the President, and I'll pay for the call, if you would, ask the President if he would put an import fee on imported oil, and that would do more to solve all the problems that you've been ranting and raving about than anything else I know. One little call from you, I guess, was all it would take, and I'd be glad to pay the bill. I think what you've said, though, Bill, is you've forgotten something. When you took office as governor, unemployment in Texas was 4.4%. When you left office as governor, it was 8.5%. You know what you said? You said, good economic news. A soaring stock market greeted us this morning. And what you said just this year, you said about unemployment, I think this is good for us. Every once in a while, we have to take our medicine. Bill, maybe you don't need that paycheck, but 700,000 people in Texas do. They're looking for work, and I don't think you have any desire or any ability to do much about it with that attitude.
Ms. Kilday, your question.
Governor White, utility rates were a major issue in your campaign in 1982, mainly because of your promises to end the automatic fuel adjustment charge and to appoint a housewife to the PUC. Last week, that housewife, Chairman Peggy Rawson, threatened to resign from the commission. Many consumers in the state don't don't believe that their utility bills are lower, and they feel that you've not kept that promise. What do you tell those consumers?
Well, let me say, first of all, the Public Utilities Commission will give you a certificate and give one to old Bill over here too, showing that 94% of the people of Texas have lower rates today because of actions that they've taken to lower those rates. And I know Bill doesn't think his electric bill's gone down, but his neighbors know theirs has. Maybe you just use a little bit too much electricity up there, Bill, but the fact of the matter, your rate is down. And you shouldn't be telling something that's not so. They'll be glad to give you a report on that, Bill, and I hope, if you would, to review it, because rates are down. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between my Utilities Commission and Bill Clements' Utilities Commission. His commission always agreed on everything the utility companies asked for, and the rates kept going up. Those rates went up in a skyrocket fashion all over Texas. And it was not only bad for consumers, it was bad for business. They were driving business out of this state. As a result of actions taken after I became governor, we changed that. We made certain that no longer do industries like our public utilities get to just pass through all their costs to the consumer. Now they have to go and register with that agency to make certain that those costs are not unreasonable. And they're checked every step of the way. For that reason, lower rates are here today in Texas. Bill Clements' attitude, his attitude was the other day he wanted to do away with one of the cuts. One of the cuts was to do away with the public counsel. That's the lawyer that represents the people of Texas before that commission. Bill Clements thought that was something we could do away with. And that's where he would save his money to keep our government going. I think that's a tragic mistake, Bill. We don't want to go back to those old days where the rates just kept going up and nobody cared. The people of Texas cared, and that's the reason they changed.
Follow-up, Ms. Gilday?
Yes, I have a follow-up. Governor, the decline in utility rates came about just in this last year that you've been holding office. Most utility experts say that that's due to declining oil prices and not because of anything the PUC has done. Can you cite one action by the Utility Commission that resulted in lower rates?
Yes, almost every major utility in Texas has a lower base rate today as a result of Public Utility Commission action. Also, and a major difference here, is that some of the costs that have been flowing through to these consumers brought about because of a lack of regulatory authority back during Bill Clements' administration. Had they been watching more carefully, we wouldn't have seen the cost overruns in some of those nuclear plants. And I think that's the tragic mistake, that so many of those costs went through back when he was governor, and we're now trying to sort that out to see who's really responsible for those costs. We're holding down the cost of electricity in Texas because of action at that Public Utilities Commission, and I'm very proud of the action they're taking.
Rebuttal, sir?
Well, first of all, you know, the way he keeps talking about my administration and everything, he reminds me of Bobby Ewing telling Pam it's all a bad dream and it really never happened. You know, I want to talk about his administration and the issue that's resolved here about utility rates. I have before me my utility bills. You know, this is not the first time that he has told me that my utility bill is lower. This is the third time he's done this. We've only been on the platform 2 other times together, and both times he's told me that my utility bill is lower, and that's an out-and-out fabrication of his imagination. I guess the utility fairy has been telling him these things, because my utility bills are up 23.6% from 1982 to this year, 23.6%. And the PUC, his own PUC says that all utility bills in the state of Texas for the average family, $99.48 per year up, 13.3% up.
We're
for the average Texas family.
We're at the halfway point in this debate, and we pause now, as it were, for a word from our sponsor. Here is Lois Carpenter, the chairman of the League of Women Voters Education Fund.
Thomas Jefferson called our form of government the world's best hope, and said if the people were not enlightened enough to exercise their control of the society with a wholesome discretion, that the remedy was to inform their discretion. 200 years later, we believe that our government is still the world's best hope, and this debate is one of our efforts to inform the people's discretion. We urge you to learn about the other races and the state constitutional issues in the forthcoming general election. Then, on November 4th, Go to the polls and exercise the people's control, the right to vote. In our efforts to bring you this debate, the League of Women Voters of Texas Education Fund acknowledges the help and cooperation of many people. Our very special thanks to the financial supporters who made it possible, Lomas and Nettleton Financial Corporation and M-Banks. Our appreciation as well to the journalists on our panel, the moderator, the candidates and their staffs, and KPRC-TV Houston.
We continue with our debate. Mr. Snyder's question for Governor Clements.
Governor Clements, you sit on the board of directors of an oil services company called Schlumberger. Until your recent resignation, you sat on that board's six-man executive committee that sets company policy. Despite orders from President Reagan for all U.S. companies to get out of Libya, your company, Schlumberger, decided to continue and is still operating in Libya. Is that the same type of business savvy and respect for U.S. law we can expect from you as governor?
Well, first of all, let's say that I cannot believe that this has become an issue in this campaign. Again, we're back to political rhetoric, innuendo, half-truths, and so forth. Sure, you know, I resigned from Schlumberger. I resigned from the executive committee. And I resigned in order to devote more time to this campaign. I felt that the campaign was terribly important, and I resented anyone, of course, attacking my patriotism. I think that is, you know, patently absurd. But I want to make the point that I think that this campaign is the most important gubernatorial campaign since World War II, without any question whatsoever. And I felt that it required my total commitment and dedication of my time to campaign and to be sure that we took the right fork in the road in our Texas government and that we did not go down the wrong path. We cannot stand any more of this tax, spend, Mondale mentality of the white administration. You know, the Sedco exchange of stock. I started Sedco as a poor boy back in 1947 and spent well over 35 years working with Sedco from a very small beginning of 2 old used drilling rigs and built it into a company with 8,000 employees. I know how to create jobs. I know how to attract industry. I know how to build a company. I know how to exercise budgetary controls. That's my background. I've done these things and I know how to do them again, and I will do them again. But unfortunately, in the white administration, we don't have anyone that has that kind of background.
Follow-up, sir?
Yes, please. Governor, despite the fact that you resigned, the decision for Schlumberger to remain in Libya was made prior to your resignation. There are some that say that that amounts to a blatant disregard for the law. And my question is, how can you convince the voters of this state you won't disregard the law if and when Federal Judge William Wayne Justice orders you as governor to release prisoners from Huntsville if in fact the judge decides that that prison is overcrowded?
Well, you know, when Judge Justice told me that there was overcrowding in the prison before and that he was going to issue a contempt against me if I didn't turn those prisoners loose and go into a policy of early release like Mark White has, I told him that I wasn't going to turn them loose. And I further told him that if he wanted to, you know, exercise his right of contempt, he knew where I lived there at the mansion, and I was not going to turn the prisoners loose. What I did, I put them in tents. I said, if those tents are good enough for our service people, they're good enough for those prisoners, and they're going to stay in prison until they have served out their sentence as adjudicated by a proper jury. Now, contrary to that, Mark White has had an early release policy that has turned loose literally hundreds of prisoners on the streets of Dallas and San Antonio and Austin and Houston here. And all you need to do is check with John Holmes, who is the district attorney here in Houston, or go to Dallas and check with Henry Wade. And they will tell you about these violent crimes that are being created by these early release prisoners that are the direct result of Mark White's early release policy. I think it's a terrible policy. The people of Texas think it's a terrible policy, and he shouldn't be doing it, and he knows he shouldn't be doing it.
Rebuttal, sir?
First of all, when Bill Clements has been criticizing me for criticizing the President, when the President asked me to send National Guard troops into Honduras, I respected the President, and I did just that. When President Reagan asked American companies to pull out their equipment out of Libya so that there would be no way to support the Libyan terrorism, Bill Clements said no. Bill, I think that was a mistake. You know, there's some things that are more important than money, and that's doing right.
Mr. Biasa?
Governor White, when you were campaigning for governor in 1982, you said, paraphrasing you now, that I believe that higher college tuition would be like a tax on the future of Texas. Well, in 1985, you signed a bill raising college tuition. Yesterday, the University of Texas complained of declining enrollment and blamed it directly on the increase in college tuition. We're hearing complaints from other colleges around the state voicing the same concern. Considering the implications that higher education has on our economy and the future of Texas, what can you do to reverse that trend?
Well, first of all, those cuts that we've been talking about earlier in higher education need to be turned around to make certain we do have a strong system of higher education. And I'm very supportive of what we've done to maintain that counterbalance so that people who are paying a higher tuition today are not going to have to suffer because of that increase. Any person in Texas today that cannot afford that tuition can apply to that school. Their grant money is available there, and every single school in Texas has that grant money there now. So no person in Texas has been denied an opportunity to go to college because of the tuition increase. The declining enrollment that you speak of has primarily been foreign students and out-of-state students. And I didn't think the people of Texas ought to be subsidizing people in other countries, in other states, when education costs were going up. We have tuition money and tuition grant money available today to make certain that no student will suffer because of that increase, and not one single student has. And what we're going to be doing is to make certain that as we go forward in this educational process that we're not going to turn back. Bill Clements would have you cut education because you can't do it both ways. You can't have it both ways. Revenues are down. That's the reason we had to change the tuition schedules. That's the reason we're having to change other taxes. Revenues are down. Don't believe what he says because it's not so. The fact of the matter is, because of those declines in revenues, we're having to make other adjustments. We're going to make certain that our educational system is going to be strong and it'll be in the first class. We did not cut faculty salaries. We did not cut into our research programs, and we're not going to cut the future of Texas.
When you speak of other adjustments, Governor, what are you talking about?
Well, we have asked for, there were other fees that were raised in addition to that to help finance our educational system. But we felt that people who could afford to pay, that would be the way in which we go about it. It's those who don't have the money that we were taking care of when we set aside that tuition grant money so that no person could ever say that they were denied an educational opportunity in Texas as Texans because of lack of funds.
Rebuttal, sir.
First of all, Mr. Bullock certifies that our revenues are up ending August 31, 1986. That's this fiscal year just ended. Tax revenues are up 9.2% versus the fiscal year the year before. Revenues are up. Again, this isn't a half-truth, it's a no-truth statement by him. Revenues are up 9.2% as certified by Mr. Bullock. Tuition is up 400%. Most people don't realize it, but tuition is up 400% because of Mark White. Hobby, Lieutenant Governor Hobby says that the cuts that were made in the special sessions of 10% in higher education were an absolute disaster, and it will take us years to recover. The reductions in dollars for the University of Texas was $150.6 million, and for A&M, $110.3 million at A&M. Cuts in higher education by Mark White.
Ms. Kilday.
Governor Clements, while you were in office, you had a select committee on higher education that recommended quadrupling college tuition. Would you roll back the college tuition increase?
No, I would not. As a matter of fact, I remember that recommendation, and and I also remember vividly being on the podium in Amarillo in a debate, and the tuition increase came up. And I acknowledge that this task force on higher education had indeed recommended an increase in tuition. And Mark White at that time said, under no circumstances would I penalize the young people of this state by allowing a tuition increase. It's just up 400%. Once again, we have Mark White saying one thing and doing exactly the opposite. You know, that's the hallmark of his administration. This half-truth, this innuendo, the nuance, saying one thing and doing another.
Your follow-up question?
But you would not roll back the college tuition increase.
I would try. You know, I am very much in favor of being the kind of person that will evaluate those situations and try, but I guarantee you when we start talking in terms of this legislature trying to cure the $800 million shortfall that has been left by Mark White to solve, and I am the governor in January, it's going to be very, very difficult to address those items of revenue that are already on the books. That's the real world in which we live. But I will try to do that, and we will try to make the cuts. And I can assure you that the administrative side of state government, I'm talking about those administrative offices like the Attorney General's office with 258% increase, the Governor's office with a 58% increase, the Mitsubishi jet, all those luxuries that have been engaged in during the White administration, we're going to cut them back. You can be sure of it.
Rebuttal, sir?
Well, Bill, I hope you can get about $3 billion for that jet because that's what you're going to need. You haven't identified the cuts that are necessary. Bill, if you would just stop and count again, you want to talk about the jet, it costs 1/4 as much to fly as that a plane that you were flying before. The real fact of the matter is, Bill, you can't have it both ways. You can't criticize me for raising the revenues and then you take advantage of it. The fact of the matter is that's what you just tried to do. You wouldn't roll it back, but you surely criticized me tonight about it. The fact of the matter is tuition in Texas is the lowest of any state in the nation, and it continues to be. The change in the oil price made all the difference, and that change in the oil price fell and plummeted these past 9 months and is now at one of the lowest levels ever. You said that we should wait to hold the special session. And now you criticize once again. If we had waited to have that special session, Bill, you couldn't have balanced the budget. We couldn't have balanced the budget, and Texas would have lost its fiscal integrity. We're not going to do that, and we didn't do it in this administration.
Mr. Snyder, we have time for one more question.
Governor White, you proudly boast about your school reforms achieved under your administration, an attitude of fixing the problem, your administration says, from the inside out, starting at the core. If you're so thorough with your problem solving, where is the solution to the prison capacity problem that still plagues this state?
Well, the first problem we have with prison capacity, and it has been a problem for quite some time, we've seen that prison population grow. We've seen it increase. It's a serious problem because, as Bill Clements knows, it's tough when he had to release prisoners early, as he did. He even closed on May the 10th of 1982, he closed the prison system. He wouldn't take any new people into the prison. And he claimed that he put up tents. Quite frankly, that tent idea was one of those problems that we had. We wouldn't have had to be putting up tents if Bill Clements hadn't vetoed the appropriation for a new prison. $30 million, back when the price of oil was over $30 a barrel. Bill Clements vetoed the prison. Didn't he know we were overcrowded then and needed more capacity? Surely he must. That's the kind of cut this man has given us. And now how do we get back to a point where we have more capacity in our prisons? Do what we're doing now. We're building 10,000 new, we've added 10,000 new cells since I've been governor. We now have under construction or purchased some 6,000 more cells. But once you get behind the curve, and Bill Clements let that happen when he vetoed the prison, it's hard to catch up, especially in tough times. And that's what we're faced with today. But we are building new capacity, and I'll assure you that there will be no early releases. The early release system that he had hundreds of prisoners going back on the street. And quite frankly, his system, in which he was in charge of paroles, he paroled people. He paroled 19 people particularly that are serving on death row today because of crimes committed after he paroled them.
I'm sorry, we have no time for a follow-up, but we'll give you a minute for a rebuttal to that, sir.
Well, you know, the truth is what we're searching for here in the facts. And the truth is that during my administration, we recommended and we passed and we had in the budget the most money for prison construction in the history of Texas, $257 million for prison construction. This is converted into 11,000 bed capacity. And those bed capacities are what he's talking about. He took my appropriations during my administration, and he's taking credit for the money that I appropriated. The only beds that have been put through on his appropriations have been 1,000. The problem here is early release. There are actually more parole people on the streets of Texas today than we have in prison. Just think about that. We're the only state in America that's in that state. We have more people out on the streets on parole than we do in prison.
Time now for the closing statements. Each candidate will receive a 3-minute closing statement, beginning with Governor White.
Thank you. I'm grateful for this opportunity to visit with you here this evening. I hope each of you now has a better understanding of the vast differences between these two candidates for office. And really, the candidates in this race have a lot of different ideas about the future of Texas. I've talked about the tough choices that we've had to make during these tough times, and that's what leadership is really all about. And when we talk about the real choices, there's a lot more to it than just cutting spending or raising taxes. We're really talking about people. How would we govern? What are we going to do to provide the opportunities these people need for the future? We're talking about the things that are most important to us. Having a plan means having a clear agenda for the future. As you know, we've set the course in the past few years to build better schools, to build better roads, to go forward with a water plan, and to provide health care, and to protect our children and the elderly. All of those things, and they aren't just my plan, we did them together. Let it never be said that Texans are not visionary people. We're willing to face our problems and do what's right. We're willing to make the sacrifices to make sure our future is secure. And you know, that's why even in the tough times, living in Texas is better than living anywhere else in good times. When we made the choice to raise taxes, we did what's right. The choice was to preserve our investments in the future. We either had to do that or cut our schools, our roads, health care, and our services for the elderly. And everything we've done has been designed to save those essential, vital programs and to save Texas and our future. So long as I'm governor, I won't sacrifice the education of our children. I won't sacrifice the elderly. I won't sacrifice transportation needs for the future of our state. And I won't sacrifice our future. Since Mr. Clements chose to close this debate, I will not get a chance to respond to anything he has to say in his closing remarks. When he says he won't raise taxes, that means he's going to cut the essentials we need to build the future. As he gives his closing statement and throughout the rest of this campaign, ask yourself whether or not Bill Clements is talking about the future, our future, and the real choices that we have to make. Thank you very much.
Mr. Clements?
Well, the first thing I want to be sure that we're straight about is I'm talking about Mark White's future. That's what I'm really talking about. You know, I want to thank the League and I want to thank Channel 2, and it has been a worthwhile evening here for the voters of Texas and for the constituency to see the two candidates and evaluate the two candidates in their positions. I have been blessed many, many times in Texas. I started out as a poor boy in the oil fields and was able to build a successful business, an international business. And you also honored me by electing me governor. And there's no way that I could ever fully repay my obligation and commitment and dedication to this state. We in Texas are in a profound transition. There's no question about that. The building blocks of our Texas economy are undergoing tremendous challenge and change. And we in Texas are literally at the fork in the road, and we must choose wisely in this election. I said it earlier, and I really believe it. This is the most important gubernatorial election for us in Texas since World War II. I can work with the Reagan administration. I talked to President Reagan recently, as I've already said, about bringing his personal attention to the possible loss of jobs at NASA and the Johnson Space Center. Mark White has no working relationship with the Reagan administration at any level, and his blatant partisanship has hurt this state. I have the background, I have the experience, and I have a proven record to lead our great state as we prepare for the 21st century. My only purpose is to help guide Texas through this difficult period. I care deeply about Texas. There is indeed a difference between Mark White and Bill Clements. My opponent is a professional politician. He has good delivery and he has a very, very pleasing personality. He's got all the rhetoric and the gesturing down real well. He's a show horse, and I'm a workhorse. I'm a problem solver. Mark White is also the candidate who will say and do whatever it takes to get a vote. In 1982, Mr. White said that he would never raise taxes, that he would never raise college tuition, that he would lower utility bills. Now he's back saying that he would never allow an income tax. Well, can you believe him? I don't. He doesn't keep his promises, and you're opening up the property taxes this month in your homes, and you'll see who has raised those taxes, and it's Mark White and his program. We can solve our problems. We in Texas have an absolutely marvelous future ahead of us. I really just plead with you to engage in this election process. It's the most precious right that we have. Be a good citizen and vote. Participate. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, we thank you very much for being with us this evening, and we thank our panel for being here tonight. Mike Snyder of KXAS in Fort Worth, Bill Baiessa of KPRC in Houston, and Anne Marie Kilday of the Austin Bureau of the Houston Chronicle. And we deeply appreciate all the work that has been done by the League of Women Voters Texas Education Fund. Without the hard work of those people, this could never have happened. The final thing that we say to you is all of this was done so that you would be encouraged to go out and vote on Election Day, and we hope that will happen. Thank you for joining us, and good night.
Great.